Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me read the citations of Professor Jessica Fanzo. Professor Jessica Fanzo is the Bloomberg Distinguished Professor of Global Food Policy and Ethics at the Johns Hopkins University in the USA. At Hopkins, she holds appointments in the Berman Institute of Bioethics, Bloomberg School of Public Health, and the NITS School of Advanced International Studies. Dr. Fanzo also serves as the Interim Vice Dean for Faculty Affairs and International Research Cooperation at SAIS. She serves there as the Director of Hopkins Global Food Policy and Ethics Program, and also as the Director of Food and Nutrition Security at Hopkins Alliance for a Healthier World. She is the Editor-in-Chief for the Global Food Security Journal and leads on the development of the Food Systems Dashboard in collaboration with GAIN, that is Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. From 2017 to 2021, Dr. Fanzo served on the Food Systems Economic Commission, the Global Panel for Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition Foresight 2.0 report, and the EAT Lancet Commission. She was also the co-chair of the Global Nutrition Report and team leader for the UN High-Level Panel of Experts on Food Systems and Nutrition. Before coming to Hopkins, she has also held positions at Columbia University's Earth Institute and College of Medicine, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the UN World Food Programme, Biodiversity International, and the Millennium Development Goals Center at the World Agroforestry Center in Kenya. In 2021, she published her first book, Can Fixing Dinner Fix the Planet?, and co-wrote Global Food Systems, Diets, and Nutrition, Linking Science, Economics, and Policy as well. Dr. Fanzo holds a PhD in nutrition from the University of Arizona, USA, and completed a Stephen I. Morse postdoctoral fellowship in immunology in the Department of Molecular Medicine at Columbia University, USA. Ladies and gentlemen, as you see, Dr. Fanzo has a very impressive track record. And needless to say, how honored I am to have read her citations on this day at the 33rd Annual Congress of PGIA. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be invited to speak at this conference at the PGIA. I really wish I could be there in person, but we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And of course, I hope everyone in Sri Lanka is healthy and safe, and hopefully we will get to see each other sometime soon when the world is all vaccinated equally and we're all healthy again. So I hope you can hear and see me okay. I'm going to share my screen, and I thought today I could present on the issues that we are facing globally around human health and planetary health. I think many of you know the world just came out of the COP meeting, the climate meetings. Food was not mentioned at all. It was the first time COP recognized fossil fuels as being a significant contributor to climate change and phasing down coal and fossil fuel use. But food was really left off the table at the COP meeting. So we're in a quite a difficult time period where we're running out of time to make significant action against climate change, but we also need to be thinking about how are we as humans going to stay healthy? How are we going to feed ourselves and ensure that we all have access to affordable, safe, and healthy food? So let's talk about, can we have it all? Can we have both human and planetary health? So I'll break up the talk in 5 sections. The first will be on food systems and what they are and how they contribute to climate change, but how they also are impacted by climate change. What are some of the impacts of climate on diets and food security? What are some of the ethical challenges we face to feeding the world and transforming our food systems? What are some trade-offs? And can we have it all? Can we have both human and planetary health? So let's start with food systems. Well, food systems are strained because we are in the middle of climate change and climate breakdown. And we are in a time period, what is called the Anthropocene. This is Earth's most recent geological time period. And it indicates that humans are having the biggest impacts on the way we are living our lives and having huge impacts on every Earth system, be they atmospheric, geological, hydrological, biospheric systems. And when we look across these Earth systems, here along the top, these top 3, you can see our greenhouse gas emissions. This is carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. And you see them all significantly increasing, particularly in the last 2 decades. But you also see significant rise in ocean acidification, the surface temperature of the planet, marine fish capture, deforestation, biosphere degradation. We're seeing significant strains put on these Earth systems. And what is alarming is the pace of change in the last decade or 2. You see this exponential rise, or a hockey stick that's way up of some of these alarming trends. And a lot of that has to do with humans. Our environmental footprint on the planet is significant. We have massive population pressure, urbanization, significant use of energy, water, transportation, telecommunications. Every aspect of human life is having impacts on climate. And food systems are significantly impacted. When we think about the complexity of food systems, these are all the components of food systems. Food moves through value chains or supply chains. Food is produced, it's stored, it's processed, it's packaged, it's distributed and transported to markets. We then enter what's called in food environments. This is where food is sold. You walk into these food environments, be it a restaurant or a store, and you make decisions. You bring with yourself your own individual factors, your willingness to pay, your knowledge, your aspirations. But food environments are also influencing your decisions. How much does the food cost? What kind of food is it? What's the brand? What's the advertising? All of these components are being shaped and shifted by different actors, resulting in massive outcomes for the world: environmental outcomes, nutrition and health outcomes, economics and livelihoods, and social equity. And food systems are also being driven by many different factors like income growth, politics and leadership, globalization and trade, population pressure, migration, climate change. All of these drivers are influencing food systems in different directions, both positively and negatively. And so when you look at this diagram, you see how complex food systems are and how at different points along a food system, climate change can have a significant impact. One thing we do know will happen is that climate change will increase the susceptibility of farmers to not be able to grow the kind of crops that they are used to. Climate change projections show that, and this is a 3-degree warmer world, let's hope we never get there, that in many parts of the world, we will not be able to grow enough food. And mainly you see that in South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, of course, all into South Asia, into East Asia, parts of the United States and the plains where there are big bread baskets. Many places in the world are going to be strained to be able to grow enough food. A lot of that has to do with water stress. We know that water stress will increase in many agriculture areas over the next 2 decades, and many farmers are already feeling the stress of either droughts or floods that are decimating crops and landscapes. And we'll see this increase in stress of water as the world warms. And again, you see South Asia being particularly vulnerable. There's also models showing that due to extreme weather events related to climate change, like heat waves and droughts and floods, we're going to see crop failures of major crops like wheat, rice, maize, soybean happening at the same time, so co-occurring in multiple cropping locations at the same in the same time, risking potentially 2 billion people for food insecurity. So that's a significant worry and threat to being able to feed a growing population. We also know that in where there's CO2 levels that are high in the atmosphere, what they call a CO2 fertilization effect, we see that with some crops, wheat, rice, maize, barley, potato, nutritional content of those crops declines. And you can see here on the right maps where you see these declines, and the top map is protein, estimated to decline 20% across crops. The second map is iron, around 15% declines across crops, and zinc, 15% as well. So these key nutrients, which many populations already struggle to meet, we're going to see declines in some of the major crops that we consume. At the same time, food systems are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Roughly somewhere between 21 to 37% of the total greenhouse gases comes from food systems. And it comes from different things like cows, methane being produced from their digestive systems, methane coming from rice, emissions coming from manure and pasture management, from fertilizers, from land use change, deforestation loss, and of course, the movement of food and waste of food also produces greenhouse gases. So food systems are also contributing to climate change, along with being impacted by climate. And when we look at different foods and the way they're grown, they will have different environmental stresses. This is showing you different food groups in the colored bars. So animal products are in blue or in red, for example, and staple grains here are in blue. And it's showing you 5 environmental metrics: greenhouse gas emissions, land use change, water use, nitrogen and phosphorus application, which is nutrient runoff into water and coastal ways. And it's showing you present day 2010 and 2050. If we were to grow these foods, grow and raise these foods, this would be the impact on these different environmental metrics and the stress on these metrics. And you can see that animal foods now and into the future will have a significant impact on greenhouse gas emissions. But when you look across all of these different food groups, different foods have different impacts on the environment, depending on where they're grown and how they're grown. So for example, tomatoes grown in greenhouses have a high greenhouse gas emission. Avocados, very healthy, big water footprint. Cashews, significant water footprint. So depending on the food and where it's grown and how it's grown will have a different impact on the environment. But regardless, the way we are growing our food and the choices of crops that we are making to meet demand, that dietary demand of consumers, is having significant strains on the environment and greenhouse gas emissions. So what are some of the impacts of climate on food systems, on diets and food security? Well, we know that climate change is and is projected to continually increase the threat to food security. This red line is showing you a business as usual, take no climate action. And you see that the population at risk for hunger will continue to rise out to 2050. Now, blue and green are scenarios in which climate action has been taken, and you can see that we could potentially reduce the population at risk for hunger. The graph on the right is the same, and it's showing you that in a business as usual, no action on climate. In the red is that dietary energy or calories will become less available per person per day. Again, putting us at risk for food insecurity. And tied to that is this burden of malnutrition. If we can't grow enough food, that food is not nutritionally rich, and people are increasingly food insecure, we will also impact our ability to be nourished. And what you see are alarming statistics in present day. 811 million people go to bed hungry. This is numbers coming from FAO every year. And this is about 10% of the world's population. This has been increasing for the last 4 years. 149 million children are stunted or chronically undernourished, cognitively impaired. 45 million children are wasted or acutely malnourished, and that number hasn't changed. 39 million children under the age of 5 are overweight, and 2 billion adults are overweight and obese. And every country has a rising obesity issue. And many countries are dealing with double, triple burdens of these different outcomes, which is incredibly complex and expensive and difficult for governments to come out of those burdens. And where you see a lot of that double and triple burden is in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, East Asia. So many low and middle income countries, they're coming out of this undernutrition as their economies grow, but now they've been impacted with overweight, obesity, and non-communicable diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, stroke. So this is incredibly costly for society to have these significant burdens of malnutrition. One of the biggest implicators for this malnutrition burden are diets. Diets are now the top risk factor of disease and death globally. So diets, which are meant to nourish us, are now killing us, which is incredible. So diets surpass tobacco smoke, air pollution, alcohol use. And these diets are diets made up of unhealthy foods, like foods high in sodium, sugar, unhealthy fats, and low in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And most people are dying from non-communicable disease-related deaths because of our diets. So this is a significant issue that the world will have to grapple with. And we also know that with diets, most people can't afford a healthy diet. 3 billion people, according to the FAO's SOPHI report last year, can't afford a healthy diet, which is incredible and puts us on a path towards significant inequities. And you can see in sub-Saharan Africa, again, South Asia, 75 to 100% of the population cannot afford a healthy diet, one that meets nutrient needs and is health protective. And the other conundrum we have is that we have these zoonotic diseases that are rising. We know that COVID is most likely a zoonotic disease that was a spillover event that jumped from animals to humans. And when we think about infectious diseases, 60% of infectious diseases are zoonotic. And of that, about 70% originate in wildlife. Well, why do we care? Well, the way we are demanding certain foods is influencing that. Food and agriculture have a big role to play in zoonotic spillover events. We're destroying or shrinking natural habitats where many of these wildlife live. And we're putting the wildlife in closer proximity to domesticated animals, to ourselves. And this increases, of course, the risk of zoonotic spillover events. And this heat map over here shows you the spatial patterns of emerging zoonotic infectious diseases of wildlife origin. Again, South Asia into East Asia, highlighted in yellow, show the significant risk of zoonotic spillover events. So our demand for certain kinds of foods are impacting zoonosis. And we know that food prices are increasing right now, highest in a significant time due to the long-term effects of COVID and supply chains. But this scenario here is showing you, these graphs are showing you that climate change, no action taken, will see significant rises in food prices, particularly cereals, which many of the poor rely on as a major part of their diet. So we're going to continue to see food price increases. And we know that food price rises can lead to social unrest. This graph here is showing you the food price index in blue, the 2008 food price crisis and the 2011 food price crisis. Both had associations with significant rise in food-related protests and riots, shown in the green bars. So, food prices can really create social unrest, conflict, because people need to eat, and it's a life or death situation for many. And we'll continue to see people moving if they can't feed their families or they can't get the services they need. We're already seeing that in parts of Latin America into the United States with the migration due to many things, but climate will be one of those. So what are some of the ethical challenges if we want to transform our food systems? Well, one thing is, what do we mean by food system transformation? If many of you followed the UN Food Systems Summit, you'd see that the goals were 4: to ensure available, accessible, and affordable food that is nutritious, sufficient, safe, and desirable; to produce food from sustainable and resilient food systems; to promote fair and equitable livelihoods; and to benefit nature. But when you ask people what they want from their food system, you'll hear different things. Some people will say community, generosity, reciprocity, equity, inclusiveness. So when we think about transformation, it means different things to different people. But at the end of the day, we're asking a lot from our food systems. We want food systems to do many things and be many things. We certainly want them to deliver on climate, health, equity, and livelihoods. But if we're going to make transformation to food systems with everything I just showed you, and climate change barreling down on us, we need to make big changes. We need to make a hard pivot if we want to improve food systems and ensure that we protect ourselves and the planet. We can't do just small little tinkering things around the edges anymore. So some ethical implications Who suffers the consequences of the world's dietary choices? We heard this a lot at COP. We know that energy-intensive lifestyles and dietary choices of those living in many high-income countries, like the United States, where I'm from, are the most significant contributors to climate change. And economically poor households are likely to experience a disproportionate burden of the impacts of climate change. So is that fair? So who needs to make bigger changes? Places like the United States, places like China, places like Brazil, Australia. If you look at this graph, you can see how much meat the United States is consuming. Meat has a big toll on the environment. The data all suggests that. Look at that compared to other countries like Kenya, Cambodia, Senegal, Ethiopia. I should have put Sri Lanka up here. I'm sorry about that. But we consume way too much meat compared to many parts of the world. So the United States, Brazil, Australia needs to make much bigger shifts as compared to other countries that are not consuming so much. Another ethical implication is, what are the implications of raising meat when we have so much hunger in the world? When you look at what it takes to raise beef, fossil fuel use, 54-1, water use, 6,800 liters for 1 kilogram of meat, 7 kilograms of feed for 1 kilogram of meat. It takes a lot of resources to raise these animals. If half of cereal production is being used to feed animals that we then consume, is that the best use of finite resources? It's a big question. But we know that the demand for meat is going up. It will continue to go up. And we know that of the land being used to grow food, 77% of that land is being used by livestock for meat and dairy. But that only makes up 18% of the calories that the world consumes. So again, is that the best use of finite resources? And we also know that livestock are the biggest contributors to deforestation in tropical places like the Amazon. Another issue is, what options are ethically permissible, acceptable, and affordable for consumers? Will the world want to shift towards lab-grown meats? Will everyone want to eat insects? They're delicious, but will everyone want to eat them? Will people want to eat these more processed plant-based meats that are being developed? What are people willing to shift to is a big question. What are the behavior changes that consumers are willing to make? And one last ethical issue is the shift of balance of power across food systems. Who governs food systems? Who's shaping them? It's not really governments. If you look at this chart, it's showing you we've got about 1.5 billion farmers and about 8 billion consumers. And we have this massive consolidation and concentration across the middle part of the value chain. We have this concentration of transnational food and corporations that are controlling a lot of the food system at pivotal points as food moves through the system. So private sector has a huge role to play, and they have disproportionate power over the food system. So how do we ensure that they put public health and climate equal to profit? How can we ensure that they do that? We need more governance by governments on our food systems. So what trade-offs are we willing to live with? Well, we've made a lot of incredible progress when you look at food systems. We've avoided these massive famines that happened in India and what is now Bangladesh. We don't have so many people dying from these significant famines. A lot of that due to the Green Revolution. We saw cereal yields increase, kept pace with population pressure, not using a ton of land. But there's been significant trade-offs with that. We've seen environmental trade-offs, nutrition trade-offs, women's empowerment trade-offs. So we have a lot of lessons of synergies what's worked, but the trade-offs that came with those. And when we think about sustainability, how do we get towards sustainability when we'll have significantly issues around some places doing better than others? This is an index of food systems sustainability showing you places with more sustainable food systems and what causes those. And some work that we did was looking at what are the trade-offs to move towards sustainable food systems. So, for example, in low-income countries, when food security improves, so does economic outcomes. Whereas in high-income countries, when you have economic outcomes improve, food security declines. So you can really start to understand and look at trade-offs when you look at outcomes and where countries are moving towards and see what decisions are being made. So can we have it all? Can we have human and planetary health and protect ourselves as we move into the future? Well, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on a lot of things, particularly governments taking action on food systems. So I'm going to end with just 6 recommendations. One is that we need to take a business unusual approach if we want to stay within the Paris climate change targets. So if we just continue to produce food the way we're doing now, eat food the way we're eating now, we, in a business as usual, this gray bar shows you that we will hit 2 degrees. So if the world were to move to all renewable energy and we dealt with the energy fossil fuel use, but we continued to grow food the way we're growing now, we will reach a 2 degrees. We will not meet the Paris Agreement. So we have to take action on food. So the question is, what do we do? Well, these blue bars show you some different solutions. One is to increase yields in places where there's less yield. So places like Africa, South Asia, can we increase the yields of foods? You get some reduction of greenhouse gases, about 14%. If you cut food waste in half, you get about a 27% reduction. If you consume healthy calories and stay within your portion sizes, we don't over consume food. We see that a lot in the United States, 30% reduction. If we have more sustainable on-farm practices, about a 40% reduction. And if we eat more of a plant-based diet, we get about 50% reduction. If we want to do all of those, we will stay at partial level, about 50% increasing on all of those together. We would stay within the 1.5 degree Paris Agreement. If we do it all fully, we will actually sequester carbon and protect us even further. So it's not just one thing that we need to change in food systems. We need to do all of this better. And it's going to take farmers, it's going to take consumers, it's going to take private sector, and it's going to take governments. But the big message here is, if we don't do anything in the food system, we don't do anything in the food sector, we will be in a very warm, dangerous world. The other thing we need to do is harness the political momentum that we've had. We've had so much great momentum in food over the last 5-6 years. We've got decades of action on nutrition and family farming. We're in the International Year of Fruits and Vegetables. Sri Lanka grows lots of veggies. Sustainable Development Goals. We have the Food Systems Summit, the COP. Let's ensure that food stays high on the agenda after these moments have passed. We have to keep fighting and advocating that food is important and it needs political attention. Let's make evidence and data available for policymakers so they make better decisions. We've launched something called the Food Systems Dashboard, where we've pulled together lots of food data in a visually appealing way to make policymakers understand the state of their food systems. We've also launched a food systems countdown initiative where we'll be tracking some of the highest quality indicators over the next decade to show how food systems are performing and hold countries to account to take action. We need to consider what people decide every day about their food. You know, we're seeing this significant rise in ultra-processed foods. These are foods high in sugar, salts, and fats. And you see this industry, this growth and the trade of these foods significantly growing around the world. So how do we ensure that food is tasty, healthy, cheap, at the right price, and convenient for consumers? So if we want people to eat healthier and more sustainable, how do we ensure that fruits and vegetables and legumes are affordable, cheap, easy to cook? These are the big issues that we will struggle with the demand for certain kinds of foods around the world. We have a lot of lessons to learn from COVID. We know that food systems are very much engaged with other systems. COVID was a health system impact that impacted every other system in the world, our education system, our economic system, our food systems. And because of that interconnectedness, we need to be able to ensure that we have strong multilateral cooperation. This is like climate change. COVID is we are all in this together kind of problem. We really need stronger cooperation, and for some governments like my own to not hoard vaccinations and to ensure that we have strong cooperation and help countries who are struggling. We need to keep food trade and flow open. We're starting to see the effects now of supply chains being blocked and locked and food prices going up. We need to protect food system workers, particularly those who are delivering our food. Never has there been a time where we've relied so much on the delivery of food during the pandemic. Many of those workers were not valued. They weren't protected. They weren't vaccinated. They didn't have the personal protective equipment. And we need to monitor zoonotic disease, spillover events. We need a global cooperation around that surveillance. And last, we need to fix some of the elephants in the room. So many of you who work on food systems probably realize the politics involved with food. Food is very political. And we need a strong political environment to support change if we want to make food systems transformation. But that means more investment in food systems, more human capacity in food systems thinking, how all of these things connect. We need movements. We need a youth movement, student movement around food like they have for climate. We don't have that in food. We need that. We need that advocacy, that pushing up from the bottom and holding our policymakers to account. We need to put human rights and equity at the center. There's some people who are just being left behind when we think about food access issues. And we need to balance the power. We need governments to take more responsibility. Private sector shouldn't be governing our food systems and deciding what we eat. We as global citizens, supported by our governments, should be the ones making those decisions. And I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Jessica Fanzo, for your most insightful speech. We are so grateful that you accepted our invitation to join as a keynote speaker. Thank you very much again.